lower your expectations. This is, the glass does not like, it favors reduction fires. And I find reduction fires are almost impossible with propane. And I'll give you several examples. Now, my typical reduction fire would start off with something like this. You get a very sharp fire here if you have oxygen. So this is an extreme reduction fire. Can we get a little oxidation? Sal?
Yeah.
I need oxygen.
It should be on.
I know it should be. Nobody told me oxygen.
Let me go check the tank room. Okay.
Tanks.
Uh-oh.
That's all too generous. Anyway, so I brought several varieties of aluminosilicate. Why do we use aluminosilicate? In my particular application, or the user's application, we want a glass that's impermeable to helium, virtually impermeable. So there we go.
Awake now.
How's your ear?
I'm finished. So we want a glass that's impermeable to helium. Now if we take quartz glass and we take Pyrex and we take aluminosilicate, we fill them each with a liter of helium in there. In about 6 months, helium will permeate through quartz. In about 2 to 10 years, it will permeate through Pyrex or borosilicates. And it will take 20,000 years to get through aluminosilicate. I don't know who did the testing, but essentially they run up the temperatures and the pressure rates to come up with that. So we're using this particular helium that's very, very rare. Helium by itself is quite rare. This is helium-3, an isotope, and it has a lot of uses in physics because it has an unpaired neutron. So without getting too deep into this, what they can do is get a glass vessel filled with alkali metals, a lot of electrons in it, warm up the electrons in it, and then with a laser start scattering all of these nuclei so they have spin. So think of them as gyroscopes, right? Now you have the unpaired neutron looking for a dance partner, and it latches on to these electrons and they exchange the spin onto the helium. You cool down your electron, you cool down your metal, and this helium is still highly in a spin state. In its spin state, it acts and functions just like a gyroscope. So it can really, you can align things with it. So in this experiment, they want to use this accelerator in Jefferson Lab. It's called CBAF. It's about just short of a mile in diameter, but it has 5 tracks. So every sequence around, it's actually traveling closer to 8-9 miles by the time it hits this target. So with this, you're kind of playing blind billiards, okay? With our cell, we can rack up all of the particles that they want to investigate in a known target area. So when that cue ball or that beam comes through and bursts apart, we can just say, well, this came off in this direction, that came off in that direction, and then they detect it. So that's basically where your tax dollars are at. Now, and I said this helium-3 is very rare. They get it basically by the exhaust from nuclear weapons, the rocket fuel for nuclear weapons. And otherwise, you have to wait for tritium to decay into helium-3, which would take 20 years, I guess, to evolve. Or you can go to the moon and mine it up there. But it's very, very rare. And helium, you know, once you let it escape, it's gone into the universe. It will not come here. Most of the helium we get on our planet comes from natural gas wells. So with that out of the way, so I got 3 kinds of aluminosilicates. Now the problem we face too is nobody's making this tubing anymore, right? They used to be made for halogen lights. Aluminosilicates are high temperature glass. They seal well to metal. So unlike quartz, this seals fairly easy to metal. The annealing point, for instance, on this one particular glass is 780 degrees C. And the strain point is about 730. So in other words, it can hold that seal onto the tungsten for that electrode on a halogen light quite successfully. And you don't have to worry about touching it with your fingers and stuff like that. So with that aside, now I work this
Who's
with...
doing melts of aluminosilicate now?
Pardon?
Who's doing melts of aluminosilicate now?
Well, Schott still is making it, but the basic application for almost all of the aluminosilicate tubing was in the lighting. You know, all your headlights at one time had halogen light bulbs, right? All that's gone because of LED. Entire divisions of lamp making companies, GE, Philips, and so forth, have shut down because there's just no need to draw tubing for billions and billions of small little lamps. And LED is far more efficient. You know, you stop making horseshoes, you got to learn how to make transmissions. That's how things work, right? So, the basic size I have to work with is about a 15 millimeter tube. And I can't bring in my jig, it's too big, but imagine this is the target here. All right, so there'd be 2 tubes. Everybody thinks of it as like a coat hanger. There's a tube comes up, angles here. I don't know, you can see some of it on my pages. And a big globe here. All that's made out of 15, 16 millimeter GE 180 because that's all that they made. One of the problems with GE, with aluminosilicate, is its viscosity is very tight. So it sets really quickly. So you could, and you're drawing this on what they call a velo draw. The tubing is coming down from a tower and it's going over a bell. Now it has to take a right turn, or depending on which side you're looking at. So it can be kind of a high speed, right? If it's vertical, you're going to have to go to China almost to be able to yield what they need in a daily output for millions of cars. So it goes on this. Now going from this direction to here, that tubing's already hardened. And we went to GE, asked them what the biggest they could make, and they said, well, we don't know. So we went there and we said, well, we're looking for 2-inch. We went there, they said, no, 2-inch ain't gonna work. So we negotiated, we got into 1-inch, they tried it, and it did this sweep, and it just started going all over the floor. So it's like a wild snake, they had to shut it down, try again. They were willing to do it at $10,000 a day, but we only had 1 day to figure it out. So eventually we got something along that line. And it's a great tubing, and I want to show you this one right away first because you don't have to wear didymium to work it, which is kind of, you think is pretty cool, right? But let's stop the filibuster and get into this. So, oh, and here, you can pass this around here.
Okay.
This is, let me filibuster a little bit more. So this is where the beam comes through. They want the least amount of glass in front of that beam because they lose energy over here. And they want the most amount of helium inside the cell here, right? So this end here is blown to about 150 micron with a tolerance of about 20 microns. Now, a human hair is 100 micron, okay? And once you get that tubing in range, we then seal it on to a Kovar fitting and pressure test it to 300 psi. We lose about 40% of the windows there because if 99% survive, they're going to go, wow, let's kick up the pressure a little bit more. There's room to spare. So it's kind of a daunting task. The other end is broken, so you can get an idea of what we're talking about. And 150 micron is really kind of thick. We've gone below 100 micron, where it was so sensitive we had to measure it by X-ray. We count how much particles come through or don't come through as a way to measure it. But in that case, the window would be inverted, like champagne bottles. So now you have the pressure of that boot working for you. Glass is always strongest under compression there, right? And we never burst the window. We call it the window. We would always lose it at the hoop where it's held there. So that's hoop stress. Start learning a lot about stress in glass, right? So that's a GE 180. And they like this glass because it has no boron in it and very little alkalis in it. So I'm going to warm this up. Now typically a fire, I'm using natural gas. And this is the most incredible fire you're ever going to learn on a CC burner if you have natural gas. Trust me on this. You take a sharp fire like this, really sharp, and then open this up. Right? So what this gives you is this warming up area, and then if you have to do some fine tuning or sealing, you can use that center fire here. But the problem with propane, as you can see, is the candle here. That white doesn't give me a lot of vision. This natural gas, this is just kind of a bluish haze. And I can intensify it like that. And now I can kind of work some of the stuff. But I would use something like this to make my window. I don't want it too hot, because then it becomes gooey. Alright? And I don't want it, but I have to see it. And that just puts, propane just puts so much soot on my stuff.
It really does. I'm so sorry.
So, let me see. This is one way you can tell the glass is by the colors. This is 1720. It's got kind of a Kelly green, you know, really green. And
That's Corey, right? Like,
this, I believe, is, no, that's more 1720. Oh, this is GE 180. And you can see it just looks like regular Pyrex glass. Yeah. Okay, so let me start with the G with the, I need the.
Oh, you need this? Wait, hold on. See? Here. Okay.
Okay. So this is the GE 180, this is the 1720. So GE 180, you can see, again, I had to make kind of a heavy wall tube to a certain size. So I just put this on my lathe and I just kind of shrink it and move along. But it's not going to be as great as if I had it on a vertical lathe, but I got plus or minus a millimeter. Okay. But so it's not that hard to do. Now watch, I'm not going to be using, I'll just preheat this a little bit. Because it does have a high thermal expansion. The thermal expansion on this is about 45. Now, you'll see I'm working this and you're not getting much sodium glare at all. Right? And I'll just kind of close this off. Hey Wayne, come on up here for a second. Everybody doesn't know Wayne Stratton, and you're in for, you don't belong here. Got a great book too. You really should check it out. Wayne, I just want you to blow that around. You work it. You can blow it around. So you get an idea.
Are you open to the other one, Mike?
Okay, when you're ready, just give it a puff. Yeah, you're going to get a hemorrhage if you... It really stiffens.
Oh, yeah.
It still has color, you know, but you're just not used to having it. But there's this real viscous stage right here. If you look, you can come here and really get it sharp. Well, no wonder it's close. What were you thinking?
You're not listening.
Two of the older guys here. Somebody got a knife? And for our next performance, not my glass knife.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say.
I got to stab somebody. Cal? Oh, this is going well.
Like,
All right.
it's entertaining. Sorry. What else do you need?
I just really pumped poor Wayne here. Holy hell, he was close on me.
They were talking about see how Steve's glasses. You're mean.
Well, you want another shot? Okay. Well, look, you can go through this. And you can see you can get it quite hot like this. And just keep dialing up the oxygen. And blow it out. But I've blown this particular size tubing from 15 millimeter up to over 6 inches in diameter.
Is that the largest that you've done? A 6?
Yeah, that's the largest all I would want to do. And it has to take 3 atmospheres of pressure. And it's, I describe it as making a a pig out of hot dogs. It's just one tube after another tube, and you just keep resizing it and so forth. And that's how we went through, like, literally about 10,000 pounds of this material over 20 years or so. So that's the GE 180. You all saw it didn't really have much sodium bloom in there, right? So that's alkali free. Now this is 1720, and most aluminosilicates are a real pain in the butt to work because it has this tendency to what we call reboil. If you heat it up and use just too much oxygen on it, it just starts looking like you're making cottage cheese. It just starts blistering up, and it's a nightmare. You can't reverse that process either. So the trick is, number one, clean the tube. One of the things we'll do too is to get like a favorable sort of ionic exchange. Either use a Pirani or HCl or nitric acid in a very strong bath and soak it for a while. Then clean it and use only methanol to rinse it, high purity, and dry it. So it's really important because it just, I think it just does not like oxygen, the 1720. So if you heat it up, it's like scorching a souffle. You just kind of sneak up on it. So I'm going to show you.
Mike, you said piranha etch?
Tell. What's that?
You said piranha etch?
Yeah, it's, you don't etch, but you kind of soak it there to get kind of an ion exchange. Get all the oxygen and OHs off the surface, right?
So when you say soak it, like for how long?
That depends if, maybe 5 minutes, you know? Depends if I'm in a hurry. You know, but I think if it's immersed, it doesn't take a long time for that to happen. It's just use it right away.
That's hydrochloric and peroxide?
Yeah, that'll work, or just straight hydrochloric. Do not ever use HF on especially 1720 because it has calcium in it. And your glass will turn white. Powdery on it. So I cleaned this out ages ago. This is 1720, the green stuff here. And one of the things you'll notice is, and we have a nice white background here. One of the ways I know that the glass is not going to bubble up on me as easily is my preheating. And again, I don't suggest you use propane for your preheating because you're just going to get a lot of soot on it. But let's see what we can work out again.
So for those of you who came in a little later, usually he's using methane, and that's a lot cleaner than soap.
Quieter too.
Yes. I'm sorry. I tried to get methane, but there's a methane shortage right now.
And you know, a tank of methane is almost $300.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah?
And so I thought one demo,
It's only one carbon.
Now, if you look at this, you're going to see kind of it's really hard to pick up in this light, but the glass kind of glows a little yellowish compared to what you see in the other part of it. I don't know, I'm not seeing it too well there. But,
you want me to turn off the light?
no. I think it's a fluorescent light. I don't know if you're going to see it better. So I'm getting some aluminum, I'm getting some glare here, and you see it's kind of a yellowish rather than a pinkish color when it's hot. I was going to do a graded seal on this, so one of the ways you can grade this in Pyrex, just knit along some uranium rock, close it up, make a nice round bottom, pop a hole, flare it, put on your Pyrex, boom. You got a great seal.
So 1722 uranium to Pyrex?
Yeah, yeah, because this is about 44, uranium's about
Yeah,
41,
like Pyrex.
you know, but it grades well to Pyrex too. You can, in principle, seal Pyrex short-lived to aluminosilicate, but you got to make sure that that seal is almost invisible, right, and not too thick. The thicker the glass is, the more intense the strain will be, right? So in principle, you could take Pyrex and seal it to quartz directly if you make the Pyrex very thin on there, right? So, and it would be totally useless.
Use a little bit of
So, okay, you got some 12 millimeter Pyrex. Why would I have Pyrex? So here's the dilemma. The big use for this, again, is helium-3. The other big use for this technology is in imaging, especially by Homeland Security. Okay, so they use neutrons they scatter and look at cargo ships. The nice thing about neutrons is they can actually go through lead, right? So with this technology created by NIST a couple of decades ago, you get helium-3 into a cell, you polarize it, give it a lot of magnetic things in there. You run the neutron beam through it, which is just all disordered. They go through the cell and they come out like soldiers, right, in a very ordered state. How they lose their alignment and stuff gives you the image of what they want to look at, right? The problem is most glasses have had boron in it. It's a very inexpensive hardener and acts as a bridge between the flux and the sodium. And it's dirt cheap. But boron absorbs neutrons. So if they do this and it just has a percentage of 2% or even minuscule, immediately they become radioactive, which is not a lot of fun. Okay. So GE was the only one who was making this aluminosilicate that had no boron in it. And you saw when I heated it up, you don't see any of the alkalis that you would normally see in the glass from there. But around 2001, they pretty much stopped making these tubing. And we used to get it quite regularly. So we had a big supply of it, but again, only 15 millimeters. So now almost all of my GE 180 is gone. That tubing that we bought for like $3 a pound is going upwards of $500 to $1,000 a pound. People are paying for this tube because it's so hard to get. It doesn't belong to me, but we keep a very, very precious small supply of it. So, what do? Well, thank God for COVID. That's all I can say. Because they needed now a glass that was hard, an aluminosilicate, and for FDA standards, with no boron in it. Boron in these little vials that they're keeping all the vaccines and stuff, the packaging is just incredibly high throughput. And all these vials get filled and just bunch into this kind of corral, really like roundup time for cattle, right? Into this bridge of size. And through that, it then has to take liquid nitrogen storage. And in that process, boron tends to delaminate that surface on the inside. So it frees a lot of silica particles in there, which is not going to be good for injections for you. Okay? So Corning came up with this glass, and guess what? It is the same formula as your Gorilla Glass. The very glass that you have on your iPhones, that are on iPads and everything, almost every display, they use this special kind of aluminosilicate because the glass, normally you cannot thermally temper thin glass, right? You have to have something thick there. But what they do is something called chemical tempering. So they put a lot of sodium in this glass, okay? And it's an aluminosilicate. It's a very hard material. And before the glass even has a chance to cool down and go into a transition, it goes into a molten potassium bath. And what that is all of these lighter, more active ions of sodium are just jumping off the surface, right? Well, this big, lazy potassium ion is just saying, well, nobody's sitting here, and it goes onto these surfaces, and it's very tight. It makes it a compressive surface. The other beautiful thing is you can now drill it, okay? You can actually work with it. The limiting factor, as you know, anytime you drop your phone on an edge, is there's no boundary there for compression. So that's the escape point. About a millimeter or so on that edge, it's just totally fragile glass, no matter. So now the trick is to kind of bend that edge. You'll see some of the newer things, but it's still a very great process that's enabled a lot of our what we have today on phones, and it's fairly inexpensive. So they took their formula and they made this glass called 2345 Valor glass, and they only came up with it as a way to address the pharmaceutical industry in packaging. These tubes are generally 1.5 meters long, and they come in a variety of sizes, no longer than, or no larger than probably 1.5 inches, 38 millimeters. The other limiting factor is, as you can see, it's quite thin. Why? Has anybody seen how a vial is made? But there's like a carousel, and all of these are in little chutes. And there are all these little fires here, and they do a little form, and that every one of them gets a little shorter, and vials are knocked off. But they need to really heat this quickly. So if it's thick, it will thermally shock. And this has a coefficient of expansion close to 7. So if I want to get to Pyrex, I have to literally use 7 different kinds of glasses to get it down to Pyrex. Or even just a regular aluminosilicate, 6 to 5 different glasses. But you saw that glass I worked with, GE 180, that had no sodium in it. And you're thinking, gosh, that's just cool. I would just love not to have to put on titanium. Here's the thing, that sodium acts as like a visual clue of what that glass is feeling, right? So as you see the intensity go up, you're going, all right, now I'm ready to hit it with the fire. Or as you're cooling it, you can say, yeah, I've got a nice sort of yellow thing here. Bear in mind, when we talk about expansion, coefficients of expansion, that's a linear rate. Okay? So in other words, if I start off with soft glass and it's got a 90 to 100 thermal expansion. And I get up to about 400, it's no sweat. I can just go to town on it, right? Because it's reaching pretty much its transition temperature. Pyrex about 490 and a low thermal expansion. GE180, 730. And it's 45, and like the ever-ready bunny, it's going up there. And then how do you know you nailed it? Because you're not getting any of these clues. It's just, you get crime scenes later. Things, I guess I didn't do that right. You know? So it can be really challenging. And it's a real, what I wanted to show, probably more than the poor guy deserved, was how stiff this glass is. I mean, it just goes through transition. And the only way to do that is just to have somebody come up with this. Now, this glass, on the other hand, has a thermal expansion of 70. And it's loaded with sodium. Why? Because they want to do the chemical exchange to strengthen the tubing as they're making it, right? And it works like butter. And almost any tube, I have never seen tubing come out as straight as this. I get some of these tubes out of aluminosilicate. I don't know how they fit it in a box. It's like a road net. I mean, they're